to this one. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Great. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Chris with Left Bank Books, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us this afternoon as we present Oksana Maksymchuk. I just did this. Now I got really
did it perfectly.
Maksymchuk. With her book of poetry, Still City, and she is in conversation with Lori's Babes. Some notes before we begin. This afternoon's event is possible because of your support. When you support Left Bank Books, your money goes directly into the local economy, funding your streets, parks, and more. It also helps the writers get the support they deserve and allows us to provide events such as this. So thank you all for shopping local and supporting this event. We also want to extend our welcome to our virtual audience this afternoon. Thank you for joining us from afar. You'll be able to participate in a Q&A session later by leaving your question as a YouTube comment. We at Left Bank Books have a fantastic calendar of new events coming your way. Of note, on Tuesday, in conjunction with Washington University in the Lou, we are hosting graphic novels in the Lou. We are welcoming Tracy Butler, John Hendricks, Dimitri Jackson, Jim Outsley, and Steens with a conversation and meet and greet. Wednesday, we have Adia Calhoun back in St. Louis with her first novel, Crush. And Thursday, we present the investigative journalist and podcaster, James Renner, with his new book, Scout Camp, Sex, Death, and Secret Societies Inside the Boy Scouts of America. A full calendar of our upcoming events can be found on our website. There is sure to be something for everyone. And now for tonight's event. Oksana Maksymchuk is a bilingual Ukrainian American poet, scholar, and translator. She is the author of poetry collections Zina and Lovey. Is that correct? Is it Lovey or Lovey? In Ukrainian. She co-edited Words for War, New Poems from Ukraine, an anthology of contemporary poetry, and has published a few single author volumes of translations. Born and raised in Ukraine, she has also lived in Chicago, Philadelphia, Budapest, Berlin, Warsaw, and Fayetteville, Arkansas. She currently teaches at the University of Chicago. About still life poems. This book was featured as Best Recent Poetry by The Guardian and named Best Summer Book of 2024 by the Financial Times. The collection draws on a wide range of sources, including social media posts, news reports, witness accounts, recorded oral histories, photographs, drone video footage, intercepted communication, speeches, and songs. Maksymchuk's poems document and reflect on the experiences of civilians in real time, while also creating a multi-vocal celebration of the resilience of community and family in the face of catastrophe. Excuse me. Lori's is a poet and translator from Latvia.
Yeah.
Latvia. His debut poetry collection, Interesting Days, was nominated for the annual Latvian Literature Award in 2021. His translations into Latvian include works by Archelius and Carson, John Donne, and this evening's guest. Lori's is a second-year PhD student in the Comparative Literature and Thought program at Washington University in St. Louis. Please join me in welcoming Oksana and Lori's.
Right. I think the way we thought was just to get into it, and could you read us some poems at first, and then we can just.
Yeah, let's do that. So it's a pleasure for me to meet Lauris for the first time. She's translated some of my poetry into Latvian last year, and I am really honored to be here with you guys. It didn't seem like a possibility and then it worked out. We also have an event at WashU tomorrow, so if you could join us for that other event, it might be lovely to see you there again. I tend to read a little bit quietly, so if you wanted to come from the back of the room a little bit closer, that would be well advised. Otherwise, it will be, there will be more ellipses than there even are in the poems. What I like to do in terms of the reading is to read in small installments. So I'm going to read 3, 4, 5 poems at a time in 3 sets. And the reason for that is I find that it's like a little bit like taking mushrooms, like micro doses very good, but large doses can kind of overwhelm you and incapacitate you for a while. So we're going to read a little bit, then we'll talk, then we'll read a little bit more. And at any time that you have a question or a comment, please feel free to raise your hand or just volunteer. We're a very small group, so we have the advantage of just being able to have a conversation, and also we'll take questions, comments, reactions, observations at the end as well.
Good natured criticism.
And hostile criticism, honestly. I kind of thrive on hostility.
That is a very good introduction. Yeah, good.
Okay, thank you. Intimate relationship. I bought a hat of fox mink fur to wear in the war. In my hat I sit in my cellar waiting. The enemy's late. I read his messages on my phone, popping open jars of strawberry jam lining the cellar walls. Like a lover, my enemy sends me flowers, emojis, words of condolence, supplications, doctored screenshots, explicit photos. Reversals. If you're following along, it's page 10. A shirt turned inside out retains the shape of a torso, matching it in form. A home turned inside out, not a skeleton, but a pile of rubble brought by gravity to a resting point. A body turned inside out is a spectacle, resembling a bag spilling its private content. A mountain turned inside out is still a mountain. Page 13, several circles. What I see is an eye, while you are seeing a female breast, purple nipple on top like a cherry. Stubbornly phenomenal, circles join, overlap, sending each mind on its own lonely journey. So Kandinsky and Class sat in each other's lap for a little while in a house they shared in Dessau. As outside the frame, yet another shape shed its flesh, exposing the blackened spine of a rising inverted star. Here, beloved, placed my eyeball, rinsed in a special cocktail, only I can crack in my mortal body.
Right. No, thank you. Yeah, you know very well that I am basically obsessed with the first poem, with the intimate relationship. It is just I read it maybe 2.5 years ago, and I still have been thinking about it. I would say as a first poem, it takes you by surprise, because the title of the book would lead you to expect something else. This is not a still poem, maybe a bit of a city poem, because the woman is wearing fox mink fur and so forth. Yes, but that just leads me to a very general kind of question in terms of what time period is the book about? How did you sort of start writing, and how did you also discover that you were working on this book?
So I started writing it about maybe half a year before the actual invasion, in the summer of 2021, early fall, and that's when I was living in Ukraine, and the Russian troops were amassing on the border, and we were assured that there would be nothing happening, but it seemed very threatening. So I thought I'm going to write it as a kind of narrative about a non-event, something that I was sure would not take place, but that at the same time seemed like a looming cloud that was significant enough that it was changing things for us, and we were in its shadow. And I wanted to kind of trace the contours of these transformations we were undergoing during this period. And so, of course, when we left 10 days before the actual invasion, and we still thought that we were going to come back 2 weeks later. So even so close to it, even when we were assured by the then American president that all citizens should have left yesterday, your liability, you could be taken prisoner and traded for a war criminal. We still stayed put because we didn't believe that it would actually happen. So you say that the first poem, is a little bit, out of sync maybe, or out of tune with the title, and that made me, when I heard it, it made me a little defensive.
Sorry, no. To me, it just enhances the surprise of a poem that is like inherently just like a huge surprise.
Well, but I think what I often say about the title is that it's inspired maybe by Homer's war poetry, and in many ways it's a kind of trying to understand the condition of a city under siege and the condition of its citizens, the citizens who are uncertain about their future and who anticipate really anything happening in the conditions of this great precarity and many possible futures kind of laying themselves out in front of them. So it's a city that's still a city. It has not yet been destroyed, but at the same time, because it's uncertain of its future, there is a stillness to it, right? There is a kind of contemplation, and there is a slowing down of all of the processes that characterize life in a normal city. And there is also, the particular situation of women of Troy, who are anticipating what may happen, and preparing themselves in various ways. It's we know at least what happens in Homer's narrative, and we know from Euripides what happens to the women and their children. So there is a kind of, I think, it's very much picking up on this ancient streak of what happens to bodies of people and to their souls and their minds during occupation, and to their psychologies, actually. There is a way in which maybe you're trying to take control of the situation that's out of control, also, by imagining what survival would involve, what it would take.
Right. No, the ancient sort of subtext is, I think, present throughout the collection, and I mean also in intimate relationship. I could go on about this poem. It's just so rich to me. You would also, of course, get Sappho, who sort of portrays erotic relationships in military terms. Here it is maybe vice versa. There is also I think something kind of incongruous about the image, of course, about of a woman, sort of a bit dressed up, sitting in a basement, but you know, with the fur, you have a bit of a femme fatale, maybe, who is waiting for the enemy to sort of do something to the enemy. So
Yeah, like Judith thing going on, but definitely also like Helen.
yeah, but that aside, just also in these first three poems that we heard, I think one of the things that you are doing, not doing per se, but there is an interesting sort of interplay in your poems about between the sort of very kind of local. I would say that jars of jam in the cellar. If you go to Eastern Europe, you will just see it everywhere. I have my own countryside basement in mind when I think about it. But then again, some of the poems are, or rather many of the poems are actually, I would not say removed, but sufficiently abstract that they could be also been written about different war zones. And so I was just thinking about how you sort of navigated this specificity on the one hand, or more universal sort of approach.
Yeah, I suppose some of the poems are very specific and even indicate some of them names of cities or like particularities of cuisine that tie to time. Also, a lot of the poetry that has to do with the use of modern technology. It's very, I mean, you could only have written it in the past 3 years just because, for example, drones have not been used in these ways. Now we have a lot more access to what warfare actually looks like because people wear body cams. So often you will watch this footage of somebody wearing a body cam who is actually getting killed. So the body cam transmits things in real time through Starlink, and you're kind of watching people being obliterated in real time. You can, see all of these aerial images. You can see images from drones that are also dropping explosives into the trenches. You can also see interactive maps. People in their apartments with their cell phones recording like how things are being destroyed or what is hit, or the occupying soldiers entering this or that part of the city, and also footage from these cameras in stores about soldiers entering again, taking people captive, dragging them out. So there is just so much, I think, footage, some of which I kind of incorporate into some of these poems that is not timeless at all. It's very much indexed to the particular moment in history. And at the same time, I have this urge to transcend the current moment and write poems that are about war, and not about a specific war, but poems that would illuminate something about the conditions of civilians trapped in these, if not impossible, but difficult liminal situations. So in some ways, I try to do that by extending the vision to the previous Good War. There are quite a few poems that are also about the Second World War. But many of the poems they seem even more ancient than that, in that they're about what it means to be writing poetry about war, and what it means to be living through a war, and what it takes to not just survive these situations, but actually kind of flourish within them. What do we do? It's not like I give advice, but I try again to name a couple of things that can give meaning even to these insane and terrifying scenarios.
Right. This is definitely one of the sort of one of the motifs that really strike me and really interests me in this book is just the how self-reflective it is in terms of you have many poems that actually actively reflect about what it means to write poetry in wartime, and just a sort of record of trying to navigate this impossible, intense, overwhelming experiences is just it just continually amazes me, and that is why I think it is just such a invaluable record from life. So, I did not have a question, so yeah, please.
Still, page 32. Still life of a person with a pug. She was walking her pug down the street in the town where she spent her childhood and teenage years, still in her winter coat, even though it was getting warmer, and the buds on the poplars grew engorged. Something bit her in the back, and she fell and lay there on the sidewalk. The next day, a neighbor brought out a sheet with tiny roses for that which was once her body, a matching pillowcase for the pug. A passerby took the photograph and posted it on Telegram, causing an avalanche of angry emojis. Water under the bridge. No more bridge now, but the river flows as it did before, like a single tear rolls down the face of the landscape. Tears through the terrain played out read by another tear and another before it. Doesn't breathe when the towns clustered along its banks lie in ruins. Doesn't weep, cradling the corpses, toying with the remains. Indiscriminate like a poet's flow, reflecting everything, changing nothing. Drone footage. When a shell strikes a person, there is a scattering, resembling a flock of birds taking off, hands flying in the air, signaling, feet levitating in mid-kick. There are avian shapes casting shadows, lithe and carefree from on high. Rocket in the room. What the rocket has in common with a room full of children is its current location. Somebody thought the rocket belonged in a room with children, and now it's here. In time, someone else will come and collect the pieces of the rocket and of the children, weeping and shouting insults at the sky. But for now, this rocket and these children are an unsorted matter, a puzzle awaiting a solution.
Right. No, this just thank you. This is no. This is also just one of these overwhelming poems. But just from what you said, and to try to pick up the thread, it it is in Water Under the Bridge. You say that poetry reflects everything, changes nothing, and of course, since the book is since the poem refers to a river, we would also of course think of Auden. The poetry survives in a valley of its own making, and to me, it is just like a bit of a terrifying, sort of a terrifying, but very powerful discovery that the poet can just disclose. And to me, this is also just shows again an intense sort of attempt to navigate this impossible situation. This time, just from the perspective of a poet writing. And I was just wondering if you could speak more to that, since one is then immediately compelled, one is just surprised that then if poetry changes nothing, then you have to read the book in also just a bit of a different way, because you don't have like a straight up narrative of kind of deliverance, expected deliverance or optimistic hope for the future. And it just I'm struggling to formulate like a real question, but just can you maybe speak to the sort of cluster of things that I brought up?
Like maybe that there is some kind of tension within the book itself, whereby the book exists, and yet the book itself says that its existence is completely unnecessary and even.
But then again, I mean, we are here and we are learning. We're just learning so much about lives of people in Ukraine. So of course there is an immediate value to the poetry. But there is this sort of, in a way, untenable feeling expressed in these lines, and I think elsewhere. Also in the poem, and yes, I would say a hopeless resilience would be something approaching that.
Well, I think that the fact that the sentiment that poetry maybe isn't like an agent of change is something that many poets express in various ways. It's maybe like a source of shame and frustration, but at the same time it's empowering, because it demonstrates, or at least it tries to defend poetry from the need to be useful in any way, to change something beyond itself. So in many ways, it just puts poetry as its own end, right? The reason we make this art is maybe for the sake of the art that is being made, but also for the sake of the transformation of the artist. And some poets also think that even though it doesn't change anything in the present, you do change the future. So even though there is nothing to be done by the poet in the current moment, the fact that the poem can travel and affect other people can potentially lead to a changed situation down the road. It just, another frustrating thing is that no matter how much poetry we've written, we are constantly returning to the cycle of violence and atrocity and commitment to doing harm. So, Americans have amazing poetry. There are 10,000 books of poetry published every year in the English language. And yet, it doesn't protect us from the rage and the injustice and frankly the ugliness of our leaders and our basest anxieties and fears and desires to exclude others that got them elected. So there is only so much that poetry can do, and we hope for some kind of, I don't know, positive transformation, but the hope time and again shows itself to be a futile hope.
Right. No, very. I mean, nothing more somber. I guess could be said. But I agree. I mean, in terms of like just very recent events, this is a blessing to have you here because just to turn the focus away from whatever so-called negotiations and actually just look at actual. Get closer to actual Ukrainian lives is just like a blessing to me personally, and I hope also to others present. One just to try no easy way to move to a different subject, but I would just wanted to. One thing that also struck me when reading your book was the sort of steadiness of the voice. It's sort of measured and sort of resolute step, and as I'm just wondering. About first of all the way that you arrived at this particular voice. Is it a voice that you sort of share with when you are writing in Ukrainian, or yeah? So I will start with these.
An excellent question. I don't know. You cannot read.
I can read it but understand it. I can understand. No, I mean I read Russian, so I read some Ukrainian.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I mean the people who read both say that it looks like it's completely two different poets writing in these two languages, and I think that's right. I think my English language poetry is quite estranged. And some of it has to do with the fact that I'm writing in English, which is a kind of language of privilege, and also the language that's not under existential threat. It's not my native language. It's not the language of the people who are facing a genocide, at least not yet, or not in the current moment. And I think it gives me also it's not just about the language, but also that when I'm writing in English, I also tend to occupy a somewhat different perspective. So I'm not writing just as a Ukrainian, I'm also writing as an American. And as an American, again, knowing our history and how prone we are to adventurism and violence and how cunning we are in trying to con other countries into opening their doors to us and giving us their resources. And sometimes we don't even con them. Sometimes we just have covert operations that allow us for plausible deniability to overthrow governments because this serves our interests. So we're basically doing all of the things that the enemies of Ukrainians are doing as being described in the book. And for me to be able to take the perspective of somebody who is implicated, who is the beneficiary of the kind of violent and covetous imperialism is an illuminating way to also kind of write the verses from the perspective of somebody who is also under attack. So I can be both. And the fact that I'm not just the victim, but also an observer of the events that make victims out of people and a beneficiary of the same type of event in different contexts. I think it gives me this, like alienated, I think it's alienated and estranged perspective on things.
Right. Well, I mean, I will have to think about this this so long and hard. But thank you for it is just like and again it just shows to me just a brilliant poetic intelligence, just like navigating very difficult. I will have to think about this long and hard. Can we read some more poems? Thank you.
Page 72. Advice to a young poem. A little poem, fine and sharp like a charm, mysterious, a maker of no sense. Fewer things can go wrong with fewer lines. Fewer promises break and fewer words. Little ones trickle out of the cage through bars one can barely see, seep through the capillaries in a windowless and evasive mind has devised ways to protect itself against spells and magic. Helpless yet busily resilient, they form like clouds, woven of gauze and mucus, dealing in recovery of broken hope, delivery of the forgotten, inessential yet dear. Little ones of no weight are enough to transform as one peers into the sky to the sound of an arid siren, falls asleep in a bathtub, dances inside a siren. Page 87. 9 pages, and this one has an epigraph from Hegel. History is not the soil in which happiness grows. The periods of happiness in it are the blank pages of history. In the story of a life, too, happiness is a kind of silence, a lacuna of meaning, a sweet ellipsis. No disruptions, dangerous forks in the road, hard rocks to hurl, thrills that shake to the core. In the blessed lull of unearned, recalling calm, there are stories to tell, words to form. Weaving verses out of faint gusts of wind, lacerating branches, filling the pages with clouds and trees, songbirds calling out of the thicket, shadows settled on a beloved face, things so delicate and so thin, they barely appear on the clear film of a life well lived, each day a rhyme for the previous day, synchronized and ordered.
Thank you.
Page 112. Kingdom of Hens. In the brief intermission between world wars, we somehow managed to weave a language out of the things we felt mattered for our future as an impermanent species. Barely even words, but collections of signals from distant planes of existence, patterns expressive of a communion between roots and surfaces, sprawling networks of fungi, projectiles of spores, shooting out like smart self-navigating missiles, propagating a form of rebirth that would touch us all, impartially, indiscriminately. Approximations. Waking up in a borrowed room, in a body borrowed for a time, in a time borrowed and hardly used. I remember how light my head becomes when the boys overtaking us in the alley tickle me with guns, running them down my spine, down to my head. How I levitate, the force of dream suppressed, lifting me up and up. And the way it gets dark when strange men pound on my door at night, shouting, "Open up, or we'll break it in." Right before the war, I'd wake up in bed, dreaming of another bed, body in it exposed, bone by bone, like a radiograph, through a brilliance, an explosion tearing at the membrane that ensconce the sleeper. Close, yet not an exact match, like a rhyme in a poem, decomposed post-haste, lines blurred by terror. And the last poem in the collection, but one of the first, actually. Ambush. In the hollow of a street, we pause like travelers entering a deserted city. Nobody here, but in window shadows, an occasional ghostly face, after images of a life there once was. Famished pigeons surround us, a wall of wings, closing in on two featherless bipeds bearing gifts, seeds, the brittle bread we grew in an untidy kitchen. Rubble takes off from the sidewalk, scraps of tarp billow jubilantly. Forming a forest, we dance, crumbs flying up like confetti.
You. Right. Just then, before we give the floor to the audience, I will just end with a sort of more personal question, because the image of a chorus appears a couple of times in the book, and of course in a different poem it is a tragic, explicitly a tragic chorus, so a Greek chorus, and here it, and both in this poem, the last poem of the book, and in that poem, it seemed to stand just for the wider community, and sort of futuricity, as in in ancient Greek plays, the chorus usually kind of concludes the action, says, okay, that's it, everything has been done, now life goes on. And I'm just wondering as to the meaning of this image, just for you, and how yeah.
Yeah, I think for me it's more of a like orchestrations. There is a kind of motions in unison that are going on, and they tie us with others. And even when we are dancing separately in our individual basements or cellars, we are still forming this community that is very witness to a specific set of events. So I think there is a kind of a chorus that we form even when we are actually in different places, in different parts of the world. And it's a kind of about harmonization, I think, of stuff. Right? So because we move in unison, we participate in the same song and dance. We undergo the same experience of war. This is what holds us together. I think often when we talk about war, we talk about loss of control, being a victim or being a hero, undergoing violence. It's this kind of experience that seems to leave very little room for anything else when you hear people write about it or talk about it. But in fact, war is just like life, except there is war. And it's demoralizing and overpowering, but just like in any terrible situation, you do and you should manage to find beauty and joy and amusement and sources of restoration and replenishment, and maintaining hope and maintaining faith. So a lot of the poems return to these images of dancing and of not being isolated. being part of something larger that is resisting through commitment to beauty and harmony and togetherness.
Right. Well, thank you for being a choir master. Yep. Any questions from the audience?
Yes, one. You talked a little bit about the poet's role being, to hope that you can make a change in the future, and maybe the limitations of poetry and the frustrations that can come with that. Do you also think it's the role of the poet to witness what is happening, even if you don't know what ripple effect that can have?
Yeah, I think primarily it's the witnessing, right? It's just being there and bearing witness, or being a chronicler, and making yourself present to the situation that maybe is difficult to kind of make sense of. And so a lot of the poetry from these periods tends to be quite documentary and very descriptive. There is a reduction basically in what is demanded of the poet to some almost journalistic accounts. And this is the trend for a lot of Ukrainian poetry. As was said in the introduction, I co-edited this collection of war poetry that came out in 2017. And it's available online because it was supported by an NIH grant, which we no longer will be getting for some time. But for that collection, which ended up being maybe 16 poets and 120 poems, we sifted through thousands and thousands of poems that were posted on social media. In Ukraine, it's usually virtual publication first, and then the paper publication. And we noticed that, yes, this was one of the major patterns, that people wanted to document, even if they were not directly witnessing the events that they were describing. They were witnessing them through their screens. They were hearing from their relatives. They are thought that in many ways their job is to counteract the propaganda and to establish certain things, to speak of things that are true from private lives that maybe wouldn't make it to the media, or to remember people whose lives have been given up during the war and who again would be just a number in the media, but they would be given a face in the poems. So yes, witnessing is very important, certainly. I don't want to suggest that there is nothing that poets can do. It's just that I think all of these extra poetic goals are kind of secondary. They may be served or they may not be served, and it doesn't really matter so much for the poems or for the poet if there is any change that these poems affect in the world. But at the same time, one hopes that, again, when the situation is dire and you know that there's going to be a lot of harm done to your neighbors and to your friends in the coming years, for instance, there is going to be a lot of suffering. You may feel like you're not going to allow yourself to feel joy and to take pleasure in the world and to delight, because it's going to be a shameful, guilty thing to be indulging in leisure and art while facing the terrible fallout from various types of political actions. And I think one of the things that some of the poetry can help us do is actually to recover this will to keep living and keep taking joy in life, to kind of imagine how things can be again, how to restore ourselves, to flourish and not merely survive this moment, not merely slow down and go into hibernation until it passes us.
What was the name of the collection? that
It's
you
called
had?
Words for War. So if you were to type in wordsforwar.com, that will take you to the website with all of the poems.
Yes.
Thank you for your poems. While listening to that, I was thinking about how, and yes, there's documentation and there's sometimes witnessing, but there's also a lot of the poems are sort of about the moment before. So they're poems of sort of charged anticipation.
Right.
And I'm wondering if that is maybe more common in the English poems than in the Ukrainian poems. The kind of politics of that, because I think especially for readers in English, to read a poem that is so charged with anticipation has political valences. You know, even to live in an imperial situation or to be a citizen of empire and to read poems about atrocity that are discussing in the moment before something happens. There's a way that that can't be necessarily put to use or co-opted in the way that sometimes the sort of moment after can be, right? The catastrophe can be put to use for all kinds of ends. But the moment before, it's almost not possible.
Excellent. Yes, exactly. There is something, I think, like evidential, right? It's like evidence that can be used by either side for different purposes, and many of them will have to do with propaganda. But I think the anticipation is a private moment that is undergone by an individual, and it's not clear. There is an ambiguity to it that you cannot really put it to use for any political purpose yet. But at the same time, it is kind of compelling you to take up the perspective of the person who is in this condition. So it does open a portal into imagining the consequences, imagining the future for the person who is in this situation. Thank you. I didn't think of it in those terms, and that's very helpful.
To build on what he said, when you talked about different languages that would be different in English than in Ukrainian, the voice that I heard, the way I would describe it was dispassionate, but the words that made the words heavy to me. And I think that is probably more than bearing witness. It's evoking a response that maybe it will promote some change. So that was just my feeling that it gave me.
Thank you. Yeah, I think, this is maybe my 20th reading. So I've benefited from having many conversations about these, and I still learn new things about the work as I discuss it. But one of the things that readers keep saying is that it's so minimal. Like, why is it so, why do you pursue this minimalist aesthetic when writing these poems? There are very few words, right? And as you say, the words are heavy. So there is a kind of capaciousness to the words I choose, and I leave a lot out. But what started occurring to me as I was talking about it is that I have a very specific view of how poems come to be. My view is that whatever appears on the page is like a script, but the poem is actually only complete. It completes itself in the mind of the reader. And so when I give the script, I try to leave as much room for the reader to enter it as possible. So I do not, the dispassionateness is part of the strategy. I do not want to tell you how to feel, to be didactic, to teach you what feelings are appropriate in this context. I'm just kind of presenting you with a scenario and inviting you in to have your own feelings. And that, together with what appears on paper, is the poem when it's actualized in your mind. And of course, that means that there are many different poems for many different readers, that it's not a uniform performance of the piece, but that there will be a diversity of, it's not just interpretations, but actual realizations of the same work.
I did feel that, and I felt it by heaviness, it gives them input. So I thought that was,
Mhm. Thank you.
Why Hegel? I'm curious. What drew you to Hegel in terms of your relationship to history?
Oh, this is a wonderful question. So as I was anticipating the invasion, I was writing these poems, but I was also working with a friend on a paper on Hegel and Plato. I was doing the Plato part and she was doing the Hegel part. It was for the um, British Journal for the History of Philosophy. And we've been working on it for many years. But we decided like it had to be done then because they were doing a special issue. And so I was reading a lot of Hegel. I knew Plato well enough that I didn't have to reread it. But all of these, I think, yeah, like more abstract conceptions of history. And Hegel is such a poetic writer too. There are, a lot of metaphors that he uses that Hegel scholars argue about and cannot make sense of. But as a poet, you can take it and embrace the ambiguity and the inner contradictions in this without having to, explain it one way or another. And so I've done it in a couple of poems. But his perspective on history has been very, a relief. One of the things that I also quoted when I first started talking about the collection is this wonderful thing he says that the one thing we learn from history is that we do not learn from history. It's, there is a charm to it, but then there is also a truth and a kind of despair that's inherent in that realization. And of course, a lot of his philosophy is trying to counterbalance that there is a way in which spirit is becoming more subconscious and overcoming these contradictions. But at the same time, there is a cyclicity to history whereby we do tend to make the same kind of mistake on every toil. And there is a way in which spirit also can be thrown back by these events. So we do not just make progress, we also, through the force of gravity of our nature, we fall back into our bad habits, our violent, basic, urges and anxieties and fears. We are not always very good at mastering that. So it's kind of coincidental that there's so much Hegel here. It was just a convergence of two different writing projects. But at the same time, I feel that I really benefited from that too.
I'm wondering, do you have a couple of Anglophone poets that have been important in your life? And if so, how did you negotiate the privilege and violence of the English language?
A wonderful question. There are so many Anglophone poets that I see that we're soon running out of time, but we still have. Oh, you're yeah. I think, though, that my real reference are not, or like my interlocutors are ancient poets rather than Anglophone poets. And often I am also very influenced by translators into English of ancient poetry, but ancient Greek and Latin.
So those are good. I say it's enough. You can do with just with those.
I know, but I feel like a little, it's always a little disappointing, because you also want to be part of the contemporary dialogue, and I certainly am. It's just like the kind of the pillars are not the contemporaries, at least not yet. I think I have also been very much affected by post-war Polish poetry. So Szymborska, Miłosz, Anna Szwir are very close to my heart. I read them in Polish. And so maybe like it's not the cadences and the sonic textures of the poems that really translate into this collection, but definitely like the themes and some of the strategies of writing about war that I have developed under their guidance.
Well, final round of applause for our evening speaker.
So thank you both for being here. Can you stay around and sign the
Of
books?
course, with pleasure.
So we have the books available up at the register. If you're interested in purchasing a copy and having it signed or autographed. And we appreciate your time. Sunday afternoon. We know that it's, and all of you too. Thank you all for coming and for our other events.
Thank you.
I have moved it as did and
Just a little.
They will just use my opportunity. Will you sign the book or not? Do you? Okay, so but if you could wait, she's just this translator.
Oh, yeah. I met her in Berlin.
So we can do it in Ukrainian.
Oh,
Oh yeah, this is not M-A-R-A. Yeah. Somewhere when you go.
He's on there.
Have you worked here? Sorry. My name's Chris. Oh, yeah. I think you straighten my hair.
It is.
That's what
Would you prefer to sit at the table?
and I have something of an ink pen now.
Yeah, and I brought a uniform too.
Oh, beautiful.
I want to get this.
Thank you. Just a little bit.
Water?
Here, come over here. There's more books over here.
Let me see.
All right.
I did. I got a literacy and justice for all shirts. Oh, yeah. Well,
Would you like to share?
I'm wearing this one, but I didn't unzip it. It's a pandemic one. They don't make it anymore. I just didn't recognize it with a mask. Absolutely appreciate it. Medium up to big.
Yeah.
Medium, so I thought I should just get one there.
Wow.
Oh, I worked here when that book, yeah, when this came out. Yes. I have wrap presents. I hope
That you pick?
Well,
Henry, I think you just want to take that.
it's, kind of involved in one. 2 months.
Okay, what is the?
All right, bring that to the front desk.
Yes, that was one. Excuse us. Yeah.
Okay, what is your? PION. And your birthday? And travel with Marty.
All right, Hen. Bring it over here.
By your own- Okay. So the total is 1882. And also, okay, so you're going, you're spelling at by 1882 is There you use your preference. Because you can receive email when the book arrives. It was the same thing as,
More book because I said I would bring one back for the bookstore. She wants to
Would you like to read it? Thank you. How are you today? Right, okay, so now,
Yeah.
all righty. There you go.
Hello. It's just this.
You have a comic book?
Okay, you have a
What's your? Okay. What's your last name? And your birthday? CARCHY. It's okay.
Yes.
Okay, you're right.
Good to see you.
All right, then.
Would you like green tea?
So this one is for me.
Yeah, I know that you were posting it.
Oh, really? Yeah. I can find
I'm sorry. I forgot to do green tea. I'm just. For you.
This is the kids section.
Should I just sign this or should I address it? Or send it?